Now I'd like to talk about holistic tree care and a focus on improving and maintaining soil health in a way that supports the tree. What you're looking at is a picture here of a hillside I think it's in Central Coast, and lots of trees. You've got bay trees, oak trees, and you see some die off of a couple of trees, and those are oak trees exhibiting what is called sudden oak death, a prevalent disease among our native trees. Sudden oak death is a term that has been made to cover a number of diseases, but mostly focusing on trees that get infected by fungal pathogens. They form these cracks and cankers, they call them, kind of like sores that ooze. The tree's response to the fungus is to create this dark bleeding like sap from these cankers. The foliage dies back, as you saw in the past image. Leaves blotch, little dark kind of brownish blotching instead of green, and it can lead to the tree's death. Lots of native oak trees have succumbed to this. Lots of other native trees also in central and northern California. You do see it in southern, but it's not as prevalent yet. And lots of species, as I said, are infected, not just oaks, but the oaks are a main vegetation type, a main species type that you see all over the Central Coast and Northern California. So it makes a big impact on the ecosystem when the oaks are hit, thus the name. And there's two approaches to solving this sudden oak death problem. One is the disease model, and the second is the holistic model, which is much less popular. As you can draw an easy analogy between how we take care of our trees and animals and the environment and how we take care of ourselves as humans. There's the disease model for both humans and for, in this case, trees. And that is, if you see the symptoms, the cracking, the bleeding, the die-off, you treat the symptoms, spray them with a fungicide to kill the fungus that's causing that oozing. And there's other things that are done too. They're developing pesticides to try to kill the fungus and also to kill the oak worms that come in as a secondary problem when the tree gets weakened, and other fungi and other bacteria can come in as the tree starts to really go downhill. So the disease models focus on the symptoms and symptom relief. And some of that is good. I mean, killing the fungus is going to help the tree somewhat. But the real problem is not that these fungi that are causing these symptoms have suddenly become more prevalent and now they're just everywhere, spreading everywhere. It's really, another way of looking at it is the holistic model is the tree's health has declined in general. Oak trees and other native trees throughout Central and Northern California, they are not as strong and resilient as they used to be for other reasons, deeper reasons, and that is why you see this pathogen and this problem spreading so fast now is because the trees are all in a state of higher susceptibility. And that is due to a number of things, and we'll talk about that in future slides. Here are some stats on sudden oak death. The fungus that we're talking about is Phytophthora Remorum, and it first recognized in the mid-1990s. It affects, like I said, oaks and other native trees, mostly coast live oak, Quercus agrifolia, but also a related species, tan oak. Also some shrubs. And in the UK and Ireland, the pathogen has caused extensive damage on larch in plantations where they grow it on purpose for commercial purposes. So is inadvertently introduced to California on nursery stock that came over from Europe and Japan. And it's now quarantined in over 60 countries. So we're really worried about it. And there's been a lot of research done on how we can knock out that fungus. Relatives of Phytophthora remorum are also damaging native ornamental vegetation throughout California. So it's a problem, and it can also harm endangered species. But when you think about an oak woodland like we have around here in Southern California and Central Coast, if it hits a majority or even a big chunk of the coast live oaks that make up those oak woodlands, and other oaks too, then you have a habitat loss, not just a species loss. And you have all the things that depend on those systems, the oak woodland, are all negatively affected. Here are some of the symptoms you'll see on trees other than coast live oak. There's similar symptoms between all the species, but you get that bleeding, cracking of the bark. And remember, the bark of a tree is the primary physical or mechanical protective organ of that organism. So the bark keeps infections and keeps pathogens from getting into the tissues and the softer and more sensitive tissues of the tree. It keeps pathogens out. So when you have cracking of the bark, that opens it up literally for invasion of pathogens. Tips of leaves dying off. Here you're looking at California bay laurel leaves. They become infected with Phytophthora Remorum on the tips of their leaves and where the water and dew collect. But you're also seeing that reddish coloring inside the wood itself and deeper into the past the bark and even into the wood that comes out as that kind of red oozing sap when the tree gets worse. And you can see most of the cases are in Central and Northern California, but it's even a little more widespread than this map shows, which is now 4 years old. Another map showing you sudden oak death range and distribution. It's also showing you now the East Coast too, where it is highly prevalent and causing damage. So the disease model, let's look at it through that lens. Sudden oak death is a tree disease caused by the fungus-like pathogen Phytophthora remorum. And you can look that up on suddenoakdeath.org. So it looks at Phytophthora remorum, the fungus, is the problem, and treatments need to focus on eliminating the fungus. There's been over $50 million in research on sudden oak death, all focused on chemicals to kill that fungus. Phosphonates, kind of considered environmentally friendly, are used there, and they're a fungicide, and they're sprayed on the tree to try to kill that fungus. And after 20 years, it really has not slowed down sudden oak death problem. The oak death is still increasing. So disease model, although it has some efficacy, is not solving our problem. Again, what does that remind you of with some of like human diseases where we attack it with something that is getting rid of the symptom or seems to be the problem, and it works kind of, but not fully. Examples of some of those fungicides that are used for sudden oak death. One big proponent of the holistic model is Dr. Lee Klinger, and he's developed this holistic treatment plan that aims at improving the health of the tree to fight off the disease instead of trying to fight the symptom. So we're trying to support the strength of the tree so it's stronger to resist that Phytophthora Remorum. And in his extensive studies, especially looking at historic management of these lands where we're seeing a lot of the sudden oak death happen, some indigenous management practices and some more current practices, he's found that actually fire is the missing component that's making these soils more acidic. Most of all of California, many places on the East Coast too, they had lots of fire, periodic low intensity fires that would sweep through the area. Either they were set by lightning or set by indigenous peoples, because indigenous peoples knew that the fire helped the health of the system overall. And the lack of fire, we've had fire suppression for over 100 years now in the United States, and that lack of fire suppression means that the leaf litter underneath these trees, like let's just say, think of a coast live oak, all those leaves falling down, laying there, they build up, they decay slightly, more and more organic matter creates more humic acids, which makes the soil more acidic than it naturally would be if fire swept through there every 5 to 20 years. So it's this lack of fire which is promoting or resulting in the higher acidity of soils, which is weakening the trees and making them more susceptible to Phytophthora Remorum. And his, Dr. Klinger's treatment methods are based on that if we mimic fire, take the lichens and mosses off the trees, pull back a lot of that organic matter buildup and put down compost and soil that can deacidify, like this Azomite product with a lot of calcium in it. You can lime wash the bark for added calcium that goes directly into the bark, and take out shrubs and things that have grown, maybe undergrowth that normally would be cleared out by fire, that have grown up under the trees, that are ways, they're actually physical methods that the Phytophthora can kind of jump from. It doesn't literally jump, but like with rain and wind, it can move from plant to plant and get up onto the tree. Remove those, prune the dead stuff away, and that can lead to a much healthier tree. So remember, these Sudden Oak Life, that's the company of Dr. Lee Klinger. He calls it Sudden Oak Life. Those treatments are fire mimic treatments. They're not disease treatments. These are not treatments to kill the fungus. They are treatments to strengthen the tree. The cracks in the bark on the oaks are symptoms. It can be helped by lime wash, and it needs more calcium. And also the oozing from the cracks or the bleeding is a sign of Phytophthora stem rot. But again, we can support the tree in fighting that off by giving it more calcium, deacidifying the soils, adding compost, etc. The general biological principle that we're seeing here is that boundary tissues have high degree of minerals, including calcium. So they are tissues that, again, protect the plant from pathogens and infections. So the bark and the wood need those minerals more than the leaves and the roots. And Dr. Klinger has found that this azomite is a volcanic ash mineral source that has lots of different trace minerals in it, and you can get it with one of the brands is called Azomite. You can just get Azomite, and it's like a micronutrient fertilizer, but you can also get Azomite soil sweetener and added calcium to it to make it really good for deacidifying the soil and adding calcium that can get into those boundary tissues. So what Dr. Klinger has done often in his treatments of these oak trees, and his company has treated many oaks up and down the Central Coast and even down into Santa Barbara and Northern California. He's done many of the oaks at Hearst Castle, done some at Lotus Land, lots of sites. So this is definitely an alternative method of tree care and disease prevention, but it's not It's not something that is rarely done. It's been done a lot. It's just not conventional. So, but he has had widespread application of these fire mimic treatments. Here you're looking at an image. So he does these before and after pictures. This is actually not one of those, but this is a picture where it's showing you just one image, and on the left, the trees were treated with the treatment I just described, including the lime wash on the trunks, which you can see are white. And that was in 2009. And on the right side, these oaks right next to those treated oaks were never treated. So 2 years later, he took this picture and shows you, hopefully can display what at least qualitatively are differences. The trees on the left are much fuller. You don't see the interior branches. The leaves look greener. You don't have as much brown or splotching, and there's more leaves. So this is just one, again, like I said, of many pictures you can see on his website that might convince you more if you look at them yourself on that website. Here's a picture of an oak tree, an island oak, Quercus tomentella, on campus at Santa Barbara City College. And Dr. Klinger has come to our soils class at least 3 times and treated oaks with the class. It's a lot of fun. And this one was done in November 5th, 2010. On the left, you see the first picture, and you can see those buckets, which was the lime wash we painted the trunk with. And on the right is near the same time of year, similar, doesn't look like the same time of day. He tries to get them at the same time of day too, so it's not shadowing that makes it look like the differences. 1 year later, he took a picture, and this is that, and you can decide for yourself if the treatment helped or not. It's kind of hard to tell in this picture, but if you were in front of the tree, you would know that it looked much fuller than it did before, and it's not just due to 1 year's growth. You can tell that that treatment really did help it. Now, this tree was not super sick. We saw some cracking in the bark, and that was it. So it was more ease of something that we could do in class on campus, but it definitely did help the tree in my mind. Let's talk a little bit more about how this problem developed. So the loss of the fire in the oak habitat. Fire has been shown in numerous ecosystems throughout the world as being essential for maintaining certain ecosystem characteristics, and one is the soil richness. So it maintains minerals in the soil. As plants grow, they suck up minerals, and the soil slowly gets depleted in those minerals unless they're replenished somehow. New organic matter is brought in, or maybe erosion brings sediments in, or leaves drop and decay, or fire can come through and burn some or more of the vegetative material and release it back to the soil. In our coastal California areas, actually throughout all of the southwestern United States, without fire, the soil acids build up. Leaf litter, really healthy. If you think of soil like under the tropical rainforest, or even like Pacific Northwest, those really moist, mossy fern forests in kind of wetter areas, those soils that are thick and moist and spongy and have mosses, those are really acidic. That's an acidic type of soil with a lot of organic matter, a lot of moisture. And what's happening in our California soils is, with lack of fire, are soils that are usually very alkaline. If you look down 18 inches or more, they are becoming more acidic because of lack of fire. This is the theory and the idea, and there's been some substantiation of it as well. So the acidic soil has less nutrients available, and that hurts the trees. And shrub overgrowth, because of lack of fire, creates ways and actual pathways for the pathogens to get onto the trees. And lack of soil mineral supplementation. In the past, indigenous peoples would crush shells, which have tons of calcium carbonate in them, and use those to supplement certain trees they thought were important. Those shell remnants have been found around trees, even up in the Sierra Nevadas. Those shells came from the coast, but some of the native peoples in the Sierra Nevadas would trade for those shells to augment the soil around really important trees. And that extended the life of the oak trees. The humans were taking care of them, like the sequoias. Darker bark is less healthy. It's not necessarily infected, but could mean it's calcium deprived, so adding calcium can help too, which becomes very limiting as the soil gets more acidic. And some other contributions to the sudden oak death problem. Water stress could happen even if plenty of rainfall. How? Because the fine roots have died off. They can't suck the water in, and that can happen from soils that are too acidic. People rake and remove leaves. It does reduce minerals in the soils, and that can be a problem. Although some of the leaf litter, if it's too thick, is also a problem too by causing acidification. Topsoil is removed often for construction, and that decreases mineral content. A lot of these trees that we're talking about that get the sudden oak death are ones that we can see, meaning they're around our homes and cities and communities, so they tend to have been, the soils tend to be disturbed because there's been some construction or earth moving around them. Sometimes you'll see concrete paving over roots, and that can sometimes is not as negative effect as you might imagine, because concrete has a lot of calcium in it, so sometimes it helps the tree, but not if it can't get water down into those roots, because there's a patio all around the root zone. The base of the tree is the most susceptible part of that tree to disease, where the soil meets the trunk. That's the oldest part of the tree, and everything else above is affected by that part. So nothing should touch the base. No plants, no grasses, no mulch, water shouldn't sit there at all. That's something to remember when we're doing these fire mimic treatments, and just in general. I've seen construction happening in certain areas where they push the topsoil off to the side to build the house, and they're saving the topsoil, or some kind of earthworks they're doing, and they push it up against the trunk of a tree for a few months, and then I drive by these places and think, oh no, that's not going to help the tree, and then those trees can lead to them dying. Like a year or two later, you might see them looking really bad. So nothing should be covering up the base of that tree. And if you choose to do a fire mimic treatment or study more about it, the Azomite treatment is the one to try. I would say there's probably other products that could serve the same purpose, but here's some more information about that. Azomite is a volcanic ash material containing about 75 elements besides NPK, so mostly trace elements and micronutrients. You spread it, you pull back all the mulch and the duff and the O horizon and spread that under the drip line of the tree, and even further if you can. If there are plants under there, acid-loving plants beneath the trees, they'll be fine even if you spread this, even though it's more alkaline. Spread compost over that azomite to add more minerals and nutrients, but just not too much, and water it all in. Don't use the magnesium soil conditioners unless the tree has a magnesium issue, which would show up as paling, yellow paling of the leaves. And use calcium-rich soil conditioners instead, like Azomite soil sweetener with more calcium than normal. And repeat that treatment every 2 to 3 years. It was developed, this treatment, through experiments with potted plants in a greenhouse and shown to be successful. And it's something that once you've started, you need to kind of maintain it in this disease-free state for a while before it can really get back its resilience. But it's something you would need to keep doing, like a fire would come through every 5 to 10 years. So you don't want the soils to reacidify after that. You can also lime wash the tree's bark, painting over major cracks and up onto the larger branches. Wait till it dries, reapply it. Try to do it every couple of years. Gypsum is also known to be something that can provide calcium and help be more alkaline, but it has nitrogen and phosphorus in it, and that could possibly make the soil more acidic due to a sulfur-rich rain, which we have because of all the pollution in the air. So it's got to be careful with the gypsum. Most people would say that California soils tend to be alkaline, so why are we treating with lime and calcium? There are some pockets of California soils that are acidic, and those are surface soils in many cases. But the acidification is down in the root zone, and that was not sampled. So what we're seeing is, we will say that California soils are pretty alkaline, but the root zone, they usually measure the soil's acidity down about 18 or so inches, and where most of the fine roots are above that. That's where the acidification is happening. So in soil sampling, looking at soil characteristics by the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, those studies of soil pH are done too deep to catch the acidification. So people still think it's just alkaline soils here in California in general. But it really is that higher, shallower A horizon that's acidifying, that's causing the problem. And before you do anything to a tree or a plant, think about, is it sick or healthy? Do you need to do anything? And if it's healthy, how can you make it even healthier? If it's sick, how can you bring it out of that illness and make it stronger? Again, lime wash for any trees that are bleeding or ones with cracked bark. A lighter lime wash could be using just lime and seawater. That would work well. Why not just leave the tree alone? Maybe this is just a disease that kind of needs to sweep through the ecosystems of Central California and Southern California and Northern, and the trees that aren't strong enough die out. Well, the reason that I would say is that what's happening right now is out of balance. It's out of balance because we took fire away, which was a natural ecosystem dynamic that happened regularly for thousands of years. And so the vetting of the species that can survive in this climate and these soils has already happened. And then humans, by suppressing fire for just 100 years, have made it go way out of balance. So we're trying to go back to what all the species are adapted to. So that quick of a change, most of these tree species are not able to bounce back or evolve and produce individuals that are able to handle the acidic soils and then reproduce enough to repopulate that population. So what we'll see is just a large loss, and what we are seeing is a large loss in these trees, and we just have a lot of dead trees around. So we're trying to put things back in balance. So there's quite a clear relationship between fire and disease, where there's no disease within fire or burned areas. And it looks from, most perspectives that fire is pretty important and a healthy thing for a lot of these ecosystems. Calcium, like magnesium, is an indicator of base minerals, so more alkaline, and it reacts with water and consumes the protons, which make soils more acidic. Aluminum is an indicator of acidic minerals. It reacts with water and produces more protons, which makes things more acidic. So healthy soil has a high calcium and low aluminum ratio. So the focus should be on the soil profile. Where are the roots? Where are the roots getting their nutrients from? And what is the pH of that zone in general? This is kind of a side note, but people are often have oaks in their property, and you hear it talked about you should never water your oaks in the summer. Um, Wrong. In general, that comes from something that's true. Is a lot of the roots of our native plants go dormant during the dry season, so the plants stop growing. Once it starts to get hot, sometime and we have no more rain, like May, June. Gets warm, there's no more water, the plants aren't going to grow, the roots go dormant. So if you added a lot of water, like you would on your lawn, like 15, 20 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week, that's going to have water sitting on dormant wood, which are the roots, and that could cause rotting. But if you do it with a low period, meaning you have a long time between waterings, that could be okay. If they've got water every 3 weeks, a good soaking every 3 weeks, that would be okay. It'd be like during the summer if we had a thunderstorm, every once a month. The trees can handle that. The water would be soaked up, they'd grow a little, they'd be a little stronger, and then the soil would dry up pretty quickly. You wouldn't have water sitting on their roots for weeks on end. That's what would cause the rotting. So you can water them to help them through a drought, and occasional deep watering, as I said, would encourage new root growth and allow the tree to obtain more water and remain somewhat strong. Prolonged drought, if you say you should never water your oak trees in the summer, a prolonged drought, months and months, the trees and plants aren't, these native trees and plants aren't like thriving, they're tolerating and surviving through the drought. So intentional and careful periodic watering can work, just not a lot and not really often.